where I can literally touch my forefinger and my thumb and wham, I can get absolutely creative instantly. That's how I wrote my book, Unlimited Power. I mean, if you've seen my book, it's a rather big book. I wrote that whole thing in 1 month. I had to. Well, I didn't have to. I chose to. Remember that? I wanted to. They said, look, you know, you're going to have to wait like 6 months until the next run goes and we start putting out books again. That was like the next deadline. I said, no, I want this out now. They said, well, then you have to write it in a month. There's no way it can be done. I said, there's no way? Hey, I believe there's always a way. And so I went to work on it, and I was doing it literally while I was on the road doing my Unlimited Power seminars all over the country. We do a firewalk evening, and then I'd go home at midnight or 1 or 2 in the morning. When I go home, I mean go to the hotel, and I'd sit down and have to get myself creative and write. And I didn't feel very creative. But I learned to fire off times when I was creative, and I linked them to the point where I could just touch my fingers and all of a sudden instantly feel that creative flow, and literally would start to pour out of me. Remember, how we behave is based on the state we're in. If you want to get better performance out of yourself, you want to be able to trigger yourself into a state of mind that supports you. I did this with Ken Blanchard. Ken has become a great friend of mine, and years ago when we first met, he actually attended one of my Firewalk seminars and was impressed by the incredible results we got with people, and also impressed that we could get people like himself to actually walk. People that weren't having that intention at all. And he had this incredible breakthrough. Well, one day we happened to be on an airplane together. We both live in San Diego, and we're coming back, and he mentions that he's been working on his golf game, and that specifically he was hired by Golf Digest to go out and basically work with the best golf instructor in the country, spend 4 or 5 days, hopefully improve his golf game, and then after doing so, to write an article, because Ken is excellent at taking things and simplifying them and making them so people can really use them. That's one of his greatest powers. And so they hired him to do that. And he said, you know, it's great. I went there, I worked with this guy, I knocked 3 strokes off my golf game. He said, I was thrilled. He said, but there's a problem. I said, what's that? He said, well, I can't remember all the things he said to do. He said, you know, I get up there and I got to try to remember all this stuff. And he said, I don't know, I'm just getting the same results. I said, Ken, you don't have to remember all that stuff. I said, let me ask you a question. Have you ever hit a golf ball perfectly? He said, well, of course. I said, have you done that more than once? He said, well, of course. I said, then you don't have to think about how to hit a golf ball perfectly. You already know how. Your subconscious mind knows the rituals you need to go through to hit a golf ball perfectly. All you have to do is put yourself in the same state of mind and emotion where that happens automatically. Here's what I mean. Haven't you noticed that when you do your best, you aren't like consciously thinking of each and everything you're supposed to do at that moment, and talking to yourself, all those kinds of things? Aren't you in what I call a flow state? Isn't that really where we are, where things are just happening and you like surprise even yourself? He said, well, yeah. I said, then all you've got to do is put yourself in that same flow state every time you pick up your golf clubs. He says, well, God, how do you do that? I mean, I've been there, but how do you get back there? I said, you anchor it. And I worked with him on the airplane for about 20 or 30 minutes and showed him how to trigger so that every time he picked up his golf clubs, he could fire off that set of emotions. Well, he got pretty excited. He said, well, you know, I think it'll make a difference. But he had no idea how big a difference. He called me back 2 days later to tell me he took 15 strokes off his golf game. Now, if you play golf, you know that's impossible. Yeah, well, it's impossible, and that's why he wrote the introduction to my book, Unlimited Power. We became even better friends, as you can imagine. But Ken is a phenomenal man willing to use it. Are you willing to use anchors for your benefit? You can anchor yourself to anything, so that if you need to be humorous or creative, hey, listen, I don't always walk in, and probably you don't do this either. I don't always wake up, let's say, on Monday morning, and walk into, let's say, a seminar room and go, oh boy, another seminar to do. This is only my 97th one in 103 days. Whoa! That doesn't always happen. But I am committed to giving my all every time I communicate with people. That's what I do for. And so instead of like feeling bad or giving, you know, a decent performance, what I do is I've got anchors on myself where I can trigger myself instantly to be absolutely at my peak. And I demand that from myself. I'd like to challenge you to do the same for you. Develop some anchors so that you could go from being frustrated to excited in a moment, or to go from being angry to laughing. Wouldn't that be valuable? And all you got to do is think of times you're laughing, create an anchor. Think of times you're laughing, create an anchor. Think of times you're laughing, create an anchor. Maybe it's grabbing your ear and going, doo-doo-doo-doo. I don't know what it is. But once you know what it is, next time you get angry, reach out and go, doo-doo-doo, and wham, you can put yourself into a laughter state, or at least the minimum of a smiling state. I want you to have buttons to your own brain. You should be in charge. Now, that's how you create an anchor. 2 steps. Get yourself in a state, and at the peak, consistently do something unique over and over again, and just do it until it's conditioned. If you want to learn more about anchoring, and you really want to refine it so you're really, really good at it, 1, practice. But 2, if you want some additional distinctions, then get my book or contact us, because we have a series of videotapes that'll show you exactly how to do anchoring. and we do it in slow motion, and we actually demonstrate it over and over again, including how to eliminate phobias and so forth, so you could do those for yourself or other people. But for right now, today, let's make sure you utilize what you already know, because you can get results right now without any more instruction. Now you might ask me, how long does an anchor last? Well, it depends. When you go to do an anchor, if you want to know how long it's going to last, part of what makes it last is how intense was the state you anchored in the first place. In other words, if you're in a state of absolute total motivation, excitement, and you anchor that, that's going to be more powerful than if you go, yeah, I'm kind of motivated, yeah, anchor that. In other words, if your state is not real intense, the anchor may not last a long time. Does that make sense? Secondly, if an anchor is going to last, you need to link it to something unique. So for example, if somebody else is laughing and you want to anchor them, so while they're laughing, you reach over and give them a handshake. Is that going to work? Well, if you shake their hand uniquely, and you do it over and over again, that handshake can later, when you shake their hands, cause them to smile or laugh. There's no doubt about it, if they're laughing strongly enough. But a handshake, what's going to happen? Somebody else is going to shake their hand, they're going to laugh for no reason. Their brain's going to go, what's going on here? And pretty soon it'll begin to dilute the anchor. So if you want an anchor to last, make sure you're really in state and make it be unique. That's why I'm using some of these weird noises, and I would like squeeze a part of my body. In other words, I would link to the state I want a unique kind of touch and a unique kind of sound. Does that make sense? Okay? Next. What I want you to do is pay attention to how to get rid of negative anchors. How can you get rid of them? And again, we call that collapsing an anchor. So let's take the scenario we talked about earlier. Let's say you've had this negative anchor and it's over here on your left shoulder. In other words, somebody touches you there and wham, you fire off this depression from gosh only knows when. You don't know what caused it originally. You went to this funeral, whatever. How do you get rid of it? Real simple. Step number one, create a series of positive anchors. What do I mean? Well, let's say I got this negative anchor on my left shoulder. Well, I'd go over to my right shoulder and I'd think of a time in my life, in my mind, when I felt absolutely incredible, unstoppable, fun, outrageous, whatever. Let's say outrageous and unstoppable. And I think of a memory when I felt that way. I close my eyes, I go into the memory, I actually step into the picture or into the feeling, so I'm absolutely there again. And right at the peak of emotion, right when I'm feeling absolutely incredibly outrageous and strong, I reach over and touch my right shoulder. Remember the negative anchor's on my left. I go over to, let's say, my right, and I touch it and squeeze it and maybe make a sound. Maybe I go, yes. And then I think of another peak time in my life. Something else where I felt really incredible, powerful, like I could handle anything. And right at the peak moment, I reach over and go, yes. And I do this over and over again until I've literally conditioned my right shoulder area where I can just go, yes, and wham, I feel strong immediately. Are you following me on this? What we're doing is creating a series of positive anchors, what we call stacking an anchor. Now what do? Well, once I've got it, I test it. I get out of state, meaning I don't think about anything that would excite me, and I just reach over and I do the same thing. I'll go, yes! And sure enough, wham, I start to feel the same kinds of feelings. Great, I've got an anchor that works. What do I do next? Step two. Step one was create a series of positive anchors. Step two, I fire off both the positive and negative anchors simultaneously. What the heck does that mean? I mean, I'm going to reach over and I'm going to touch my left shoulder where normally I get depressed. And I'm also going to reach over and touch my right shoulder where I feel great. And I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to fire them simultaneously in my brain. Now, when you do this, usually steam will come out of your ears. You may feel actually a little weird at first. In fact, if you watch people do this, sometimes their face becomes asymmetrical for a moment, where one part, like a cheek, will start to come up and the other goes down. That's because in your brain, you literally fired two completely different types of emotions in your brain simultaneously. Two different nerve messages, if you will. And when they collide in your brain, the one that is strongest literally collapses the other one. Does that make sense? That's why we create a series of positive anchors instead of just a negative one. Otherwise, we'd have you just do something, a positive anchor like, remember time you felt good? You go, yeah, you anchor it, yeah, anchor it, yeah, anchor it, yeah. Now what if you did that? One side is total depression, the other, yeah, you feel pretty good. You go, wham! Guess what? Now you'd be depressed on both sides. But if you create a series of positive anchors on one side, a series of them, they're really strong, and you now fire them both off, it'll overpower the negative. What does that mean? It means now when you touch your left shoulder, you'll feel neutral feelings, or maybe even positive. When you touch your right, you'll feel neutral or positive. It's called collapsing an anchor. Again, I'm trying to jam it in real fast. I'm going to give you a way to do it before we leave here as well. So let's just review some of the key elements to make an anchor be effective. Number one is the intensity of the state the person's in. In other words, if you want a strong anchor, make sure that when you go to anchor yourself or somebody else, that you're really feeling strongly about what it is you're linking in. So if you want to anchor in something like motivation, you got to really be in a motivated state, not like a partially motivated state. Two, you've got to make sure that you create the trigger. That is, let's say the touch or the voice tone at the peak of the emotion. Imagine it like a roller coaster.